Hello, and today I'm reviewing Sudden by Oliver Strange. Sudden was published in 1933 and is the first in a series of novels following James, sometimes Jim Green, aka Sudden. This book and the popularity of the wider series survived Oliver Strange's death in 1952, with further books being added to the series after that point by the publishers who continued to use his name. This book had at least 20 printings prior to the 1981 edition you can see here, testifying to that popularity. The story begins with Sudden educating a bully on the error of his ways in a very typically Wild West style. He is then employed by the local governor to clear up the city of Windy, which is being bothered by, among other things, a vicious rancher and his gang of thugs, and the corrupt sheriff. On his way to Windy, Sudden discovers the murdered Kit Purdy and takes him into town. Kit's father owns the biggest ranch locally, and the evil Burdett brothers want a piece of that. The suspicion for the murder then falls upon the youngest Burdett, Luce. Sudden is unconvinced and saves Luce from a lynching. Luce is in love with Nan Purdy, the dead man's sister, and their guardians naturally frown upon any sort of relationship, giving proceedings at this point a touch of the Romeo and Juliets. Sudden is employed by Chris Purdy, Kit's dad, to run the ranch now that his son is dead. Among the ranch hands is Yargo, an old friend of Sudden's. What follows this point is an episodic series of attempts on Sudden's life as the eldest Burdett brother, King, attempts to take control of the Purdy ranch. Sudden, perhaps unsurprisingly given the era that it was published, combines some of the good and not so good aspects of Edgar Rice Burroughs, whose Tarzan and John Carter series were dominating pop culture at the time. The negatives are some minor aspects of the characterization, which might well be considered racist by today's standards, as indeed will the fact that Sudden's horse is called the N-word, which I definitely don't have a pass for. The upside is a typically Burroughsian pace to proceedings, and Sudden, like Tarzan, is an indestructible, infallible hero beloved by all around him. By about halfway through the book, though, the hero worship for our hero becomes to get a little bit much, taking on the tone that's beyond slightly cringy "what a guy" moments, and steps into what you might consider homoerotica. Chris Purdy employs Sudden as foreman because of his growing faith in this confident young stranger with the steady eyes and firm lips upon which danger brought no more than a sardonic smile. And before a bare-fist brawl, some of the betting public side with his opponent, while others slide Sudden's way. A few studied the other with appraising eyes, noted the lean, wiry frame, remembered the swift, pantherish action of his body, and divined the steely sinews which rippled beneath his skin at every moment. The problem with this, and Sudden as a character generally, is that Sudden doesn't really earn the adulation, he's merely given it, and being utterly indestructible generally doesn't make for a very exciting hero. Sudden's morality, his super strength and super speed might make him the genre's superhero, but none of the bad guys have any kryptonite, so the outcome of the novel is pretty clear from the very early going. In the book's first scene, Sudden disarms the bully Parsons to stop him firing inside a crowded bar, and then shoots 10 shots into a silver dollar to show him the folly of picking fights with strangers, and how dangerous the Wild West is, even if the danger only really comes from a show-off's ricochets. Sudden's next challenge is the gunslinger albino Whitey, introduced thusly on page 71. He had one remarkable feature, a skin which even the fierce sun of the southwest could not colour. His clean-shaven face was white, the unhealthy, sick white of something grown in darkness, and in this deathly pallor were set blue eyes, like polished stones, unwinking, expressionless. Whitey, for so he was known, never smiled. His face might have been a marble mask, but lacked the dignity of the carven stone. He wore 2 guns, and his long, talon-like fingers were never far from their butts. A decent introduction, but the idea of Whitey posing a genuine challenge to Sudden is scuppered in his own introduction, when Whitey then also relates the story of his first encounter with the one boy who could beat him in a duel, and you'd have to really take your eye off the ball and the page to not know that that boy has grown up to be our hero. Indeed, Sudden recognises Whitey as soon as he spots him, so despite the effort expended making Whitey out to be a threat, Strangetown undoes all of that on the same page. Whitey is predictably dead and buried inside the next 10 pages, and while his gradual realisation and the clammy fingers of fear that he feels in that moment is pretty well done, dramatic irony only really works when it's the protagonist on the business end. But from this depiction of Whitey, it is clear, if it wasn't already, that this is not a novel trading in subtleties. Each challenge thrown at Sudden is merely a way of proving that he is too fast, too strong, and particularly too lucky to be killed. Subtleties be damned. This is a novel where inner monologues don't exist, where Sudden, battling for his life in raging rapids, takes the time to muse, "I'll need wings to beat this proposition, and I'm liable to get 'em, but it'll be too late." Where the prospector California, cursing the fact that his conversation has been overheard, launches into a soliloquy that is also overheard, and learning literally nothing from this, the eavesdropper then performs a soliloquy of his own. While sometimes the blatantness of this all is amusing in its own way, sometimes you have to just accept that it is to the book's detriment. The lively landlady of the Lucky Chance, plucky Lou Levine, says to King Burdett, "Oh, you'll be the death of me," and it doesn't so much foreshadow her coming doom as write it on the novel's forehead and then headbutt it into the audience. Taking the next step on from that, Strange's dialogue indulges in every cliche of the genre on your screen right now. And as well as that, perhaps this depiction of the Irishman McGee might be considered racist as well. So what does the novel get right? Well, having a Burroughsian pace is never a bad thing, and while this book doesn't have the franticness of Tarzan, it's never really boring. It moves from set piece to set piece briskly, and it's only the fact that you know that Sudden will always be able to drag himself out of that river, no matter how many times the narrator says it's impossible. He will always be faster, no matter how fast Strange says that somebody else might be. The novel also has a decent eye for some dry humour. Sudden, travelling towards Windy, passes a stranger heading in a different direction. "Only fella I ever knowed who visited there was bored to death," the stranger says. "Too slow for him, huh?" asks Sudden. "No, too fast. It was a 45 slug that bored him." And after hearing about Whitey having a notch on his gun for each of the men he's killed, Sudden quips that he must be a regular Undertaker's help. Other attempts at humour, such as the banter between Yargo and Sudden, would be stronger if it was set up first. Jokes about Yargo having a big ear and big feet fall flat because he's not acknowledged as having those features ahead of the punchline. They could easily have been included in the description we get of Yargo when he first appears, but instead we only get the perfunctory, the short, sturdy figure with its broad shoulders, long arms and slightly bowed legs. Now, I am a fan of Wild West media, as you can probably tell by what's appeared on your screen so far in this video. I think that Strange's publishers were kind of sleazy, and I question their motives in continuing the story under his name after he died. But I think that Strange himself wrote from a place of genuine affection. And I think that there are times in the novel when this is generally overt. There's a genuine attempt to romanticize the era and the men involved. The most striking of those is on page 26. There was no passion in the challenge. It was the stark defiance of one whose life had been a battle, who had faced indomitably the difficulties and disasters which the early pioneer in a savage, untamed region must expect. Nature in her wildest moods, Indians, rustlers, starvation, thirst. There were many such men among the early pioneers. Their names are forgotten, but their work survives. They made Western America. And there are similar asides through the rest of the text. And while the flip side is perhaps a touch immersion breaking, it certainly reminds the reader that these events are not being lived vicariously, for example, but rather retold after the death of all involved. But that aside, they really speak of a love for the cliches the series helped to create and define, as well as the myths of the time generally. And if you don't share some of that affection, I think it's pretty unlikely that you'll be reading this book anyway. Narratively, I think these little passages are not helpful, but on the other hand, the shared camaraderie between writer and reader is priceless. Early in the novel, Strange writes us this alliterative tongue twister. He must walk warily and windy for a while. And while it's difficult in the context of that moment to see what benefits he gets from writing in that way, Strange clearly likes to engage with a poetic function, and it's clear that as a writer he is working way harder and more effectively than the writer of a mere pulp or throwaway potboiler has any need to. And while the novel is not without issues as mentioned, I think that there's a danger of underrating Strange as an author. This description of the frontier on the boundary of Purdy's Ranch in a handful of words encapsulates the transition from civilization to the wild part of the Wild West. As established earlier, this is an unforgiving world that requires the pioneering strength of characters like Chris Purdy just to survive. And to do that, it uses a triadic list, juxtaposition, and some pretty mighty imagery based on a powerful simile. I really like this. Pushing further north, grass and sage gradually disappeared, their place being taken by sand, cactus and mesquite. Presently they pulled up on the edge of a desolate welter of grey-white dust, the undulations of which, in the shimmering heat haze, seemed to move like the surface of a troubled sea. To the far horizon it reached, dead, merciless, pitiless. And this scene where Sudden is trying to extract himself after being shoved into the roiling river drops in some sharp alliteration and imagery of its own. The scene rather encapsulates the novel. It's well written and it's exciting, but the setup is daft, with Sudden inexplicably careless for a man who has survived recently, by pure luck, at least one attempt on his life. The scene, though, continues across 3 or 4 pages, all occasionally stylish and effective. Sudden could see a tumbled, boiling ridge of foam, tossing like the wind-worried mane of a huge white horse. He knew the meaning of that. Rocks there, jagged teeth which would tear him to bits when the cruel current hurled him upon them. He was now perilously near the danger spot. Idly, he watched the lump of a tree whirl past to vanish in the welter of warring waters below. Saw it leap into view again, white streaks showing where it had been riven on the rocks, disappear and emerge once more, still further shattered. He looked at the narrow gut, with its twisting, tearing, racing torrent of water, fighting its way through to pitch, a sheer 40 foot into a tossing, tormented smother of spume and spray. Like I say, Oliver Strange is working much harder than the authors of mere potboilers are required to. And in conclusion, as always with texts from this age, the easily triggered are advised to do their research before reading, but those who can deal with the somewhat distasteful in search of something interesting or enduring art will likely find something here to engage with. Fans of the era, its myths and cliches, would definitely have something in common with author Strange, who wears his infectious enthusiasm on his sleeve and on most pages. His character is fairly typical of these faux westerns, and the plot is equally predictable. The weakest aspect of the book is Sudden's consistent reliance on luck to get by, his own friend remarking on it at one point. The best aspects are those moments when Strange stretches himself and writes above the requirements and expectations of this genre. Ultimately, the weaker aspects matter little in a novel that moves briskly from set piece to set piece and shares the author's happiness to just exist for a while in this dusty world of strong men and plucky heroines, where justice is dispensed by the fastest gun and where towns, unlike YouTube, aren't big enough for everyone. Like and sub, partner. I'll see you in the next one. So by way of a special treat, because you've watched it all the way to the end, I'm going to do something a little bit different. How about that? I'm going to show you one of my races on Cowboy GTA, otherwise known as Red Dead Online. And they're off. Now, for those of you who've seen my ET review, you'll be pleased to know that my horse is called Flop Glopple. Oh, I was in the lead so briefly. You lose speed when you aim. That's why I give up trying to shoot that guy. He's too close to get proper aim on. Look at that. Killed in unison. I really quite enjoy racing around St. Denis. Actually, it's quite fun. One of the better maps for horse racing, I think. Double kill. It should be like Unreal Tournament where double kill. I should say that. I think that without that, dead again. I think I had a look at the levels before the game or after, and the guy that just got me there was like 100 ahead of anyone else in real regular play. I get really lucky with spawn there, able to get that guy, then get that gun, because when I go around the corner, there's a guy behind me trying to get me, which is really, really dumb. There you go, he goes for a little fly. Never ever, the guy in front of you who's got a shotgun and you're that close, you've got to get him first time, because otherwise you're just going to go, okay, here's the target on my face, take care of that. Get lucky here as well, there's two of them sort of getting in a muddle with each other and manage to avoid that horse heading the wrong way. It's like really handy. So I go on from like fourth to second. I'm not going to catch the leader now because there's people sort of right up behind me again. If you're that close, you've got to make it count, otherwise they're just going to turn around and get you. Yes, that was my phone. I think that's the guy I just killed has spawned right alongside me, but I don't go for him. I think he's not really going for me, so I'm kind of like, okay, we're just going to race, we'll just race. trouble is that I think somebody else gets involved, and then it's like, okay, I'm going to shoot you now, because it's all well and good. I'm willing to race, but when I start losing, that's when I start cheating. So then I'm going to get the gun and take care of the other guy. The guy that was 2 places behind took care of the guy that was behind. Perils of shooting backwards is not looking real well. There you go, I lost a bit of time there. I get really lucky here actually with a respawn, as it puts me ahead of these 2 guys. You can just about see, if you look at the map, I don't know if they come together or they take each other out, but that leaves me clear in second, or clearer in second. Which is going to be really important in a second or two, because the guy that was behind me, he gets a hell of a shot on this bridge, I think. Yes, that is my neighbour. You can hear he is rather disgusting. See, I think my shot would have hit the target then. I just needed a split second longer to... Yeah, the respawn without the horse is really annoying. But I didn't get too mad because, like I said, I got lucky with that spawn a bit earlier. And I get really lucky here because the guy that shot me, that's him to the left, he's still trying to shoot me and he forgets that you've got to get that target. And you get it. But I get it just a split second. And I mean literally a split second. I'll show you the times at the end. And it's like 0.1 of a second ahead of him. Or her. So there you go, second. Wasn't too bad. Congrats to Victor Mordrake, whoever that might be. On his victory, he was miles out in front. But there's that distance, a split second. Really, really lucky. So there you go. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.